Good evening. Today we shall be dealing with ECG case number 8 in our ECG series. The title is RVMI, is right ventricular myocardial infarction. Normally, we give a fancy title to the presentation, and so that this can mask the diagnosis, so that you get a chance to read the ECG and find out the diagnosis. This time we are doing something different. We are giving you the diagnosis. We're going to look at the many phases and misconceptions regarding RVMI. So there's a 54-year-old male with chest pain who has a BP of 60-40 millimeters of mercury. You can have a look at the ECG and have a look at the options on the side. If you require more time, you can press the pause button or you can go further. So this ECG shows ST elevation in V1 to V3 along with ST elevations in 2, 3 and AVF with reciprocal changes in 1 and AVL. There are two possibilities. One is this could be an inferior wall MI with a very prominent RVMI, or the second option is it could be an anterior wall MI. The right answer is it will be an inferior wall with an RVMI. The reason is in anterior wall MI, usually the ST elevations extend to involve V4, V5, and V6. It's rarely confined to involve V1, V2, V3. If you're further in doubt, you can look at a clinical sign, which is easily elicitable on the bedside, which is you can look for an elevated JVP. An RVMI usually has an elevated JVP on day 1. An anterior wall MI on day 1 usually does not have an elevated JVP. It can have an elevated JVP subsequently on day 3 or day 4 when heart failure or when mechanical complications set in, you can have an elevated JVP. But usually it's not present on day 1. So one clinical sign elicitable is an elevated JVP. The second is if you have access to an echo, you can do an echo. And if the anterior wall is akinetic, you can diagnose an anterior wall MI. If the inferior wall is akinetic, you can diagnose an inferior wall MI. So that's if you have access to an echo, you can do that. An ECG which shows V3R and V4R may not be helpful because V1 is a lead which looks at the right side. So if V1 is showing an ST elevation, the V3R and V4R is also going to show an ST elevation. So an anterior wall MI which has an elevation in V1 will also show an elevation in V3R and V4R. So using V3R and V4R alone may not be helpful. So you can look for an elevated JVP or you can do an echo. Even then, ST elevation generally not crossing V3 is probably not an anterior wall MI. So keeping that in mind, we have established a diagnosis of inferior wall with an RVMI. The first question is this patient in cardiogenic shock? So the correct answer is we're not very sure. You need further information because in order to diagnose shock, you need to demonstrate evidence of tissue hypoperfusion, that is either cold clammy extremities or altered mentation in a decreased urine output. So we don't have any of that data along with us. So it's not possible to say whether this patient is in cardiogenic shock or not. So how do you manage this case? You give noradrenaline plus dopamine, IV fluids, or immediate lysis. The correct answer is to give IV fluids. The obvious answer of immediate lysis may not work because although it's tempting to immediately try to open up the artery, you need blood pressure for a lytic agent to act. So if there is profound hypotension, the lytic agent generally does not act. So it does not reach the site and generally you won't get a good result. So the first thing is you increase the BP. And how do you increase the BP in RVMI is to go IV fluids. You increase the venous return, increase the preload, and then this increases the BP. Inotropes are probably second line because only if the IV fluids are inadequate, you add an inotrop. So the management would be to give IV fluids. Patient was given 1 liter of IV normal saline. Now the BP has improved to 120/70. Let's go retrospectively. Was the patient previously in cardiogenic shock? The answer is obviously no, because cardiogenic shock is an extremely lethal condition and is extremely difficult to treat. If the BP improves with 1 liter of normal saline, the patient obviously is not in cardiogenic shock because of the extreme difficulty in treating it. So what is cardiogenic shock? The clinical definition of cardiogenic shock is decreased cardiac output and evidence of tissue hypoxia in the presence of adequate intravascular volume. So you need decreased cardiac output, you need evidence of tissue hypoxia and adequate intravascular volume. Now this is a clinical definition. There are various hemodynamic definitions also. I chose the clinical definition because this is most apt at the bedside. So only after hydrating the patient can you comment upon cardiogenic shock. Now I kept this question deliberately because I see many people writing the diagnosis inferior wall MI cardiogenic shock or anterior wall MI cardiogenic shock. Cardiogenic shock should not be diagnosed lightly, because once you diagnose cardiogenic shock, you basically condemn the patient, because cardiogenic shock has an 80% mortality with medical treatment and a 50% mortality with intervention. So even with the best treatment possible, even with your primary PCI or assist devices like IABP, still cardiogenic shock has a 50% mortality. That is, out of two, one patient is going to die. So do not diagnose cardiogenic shock lightly. So again, this is an inferior wall with an RVMI. You can see ST elevations in 2, 3 AVF with 3 more than 2, ST depressions in AVL and 1 with ST depression AVL more than AVR. This indicates the right coronary artery involvement. You can see ST elevations in V1 to V3, which indicates right ventricular MI. Also V4R is given, which shows an ST elevation. So there's an inferior wall plus RVMI due to a proximal RC occlusion. So what drug will you avoid and why? The correct answer is you avoid nitrates, because in an RVMI, you aim to increase preload and you aim to increase venous return. If you give a nitrate, it is going to cause systemic veins vasodilation, that is going to cause peripheral pooling of blood in the extremities, and it's going to decrease your venous return. A marked hypotensive response to nitrates may indicate an RVMI. So there's a soft sign of an RVMI. If you give a nitrate and if the blood pressure drops precipitously, that is more than 30 millimeters, in all likelihood, you have probably missed an RVMI. So try to avoid nitrates or vasodilators in right ventricular myocardial infarction. Point number 2 is RVMI localizes site of occlusion to the proximal RCA. So if you diagnose an inferior wall with an RVMI, then almost always the site of occlusion is diagnosed to be proximal RCA. RVMI is seen in 40% of inferior wall MIs. It indicates an increased adverse outcome and indicates a high risk group. So we have several combinations of MI in inferior wall. It could be purely inferior wall, it could be an inferior wall plus posterior wall, it could be an inferior wall plus lateral wall, it could be an inferior wall plus posterior wall plus lateral wall. In all subgroups, if you add an RVMI, the mortality shoots up. The adverse effects, adverse mechanical complications or electrical complications also increase. So this is a study which came in Journal of American College of Cardiology, JACC, in 2001. You can see it classified MIs into anterior wall MI, inferior wall with RVMI, and isolated inferior wall MI. You can see that in all cases, the mortality as well as complications are the lowest for isolated inferior wall MI, followed by inferior wall plus RVMI, and the maximum for anterior wall MI. So you can see the in-hospital mortality at 35 days and 6 months. The mortality for RVMI is in between the anterior wall MI and isolated inferior wall MI. It's similar for that for mechanical complications like left ventricular failure, cardiogenic shock, rupture, or even hypotension, or even for electrical complications. You look at all mortality, mechanical and electrical complications. Inferior wall with RVMI is somewhere in between isolated inferior wall MI and anterior wall MI. So the mere presence of RVMI signifies a worse outcome. So in the presence of posterior wall MI, a minimal ST elevation or a flat ST segment in V1 indicates RVMI. This is called V1, V2 discordance. Here you can see an inferior wall MI with 3 more than 2 and AVL depression more than AVR, suggesting an RCA involvement. Look at V2, there's a ST depression, probably it's due to posterior wall MI, but V1 is flat. So this suggests there's a discordance between V1 and V2. This suggests the presence of an RVMI. What has happened is actually you have a posterior wall MI which brings down the ST segment in V1, and you have an RVMI which brings up the ST segment in V1. So the sum of which gives you the final ST segment. So you have a ST depression due to a posterior wall MI as well as an ST elevation due to an RVMI, and resulting in a flat ST segment. So an RVMI is indicated by a discordance in ST segments between V1 and V2. Here you also have V4R being given. So this shows an ST elevation, again indicating the presence of RVMI. So when in doubt, you can always take a V3R and V4R, but in many centers, they do not take V3R and V4R, and you should learn how to diagnose RVMI in the presence of a 12-lead ECG itself. So RV myocardial infarction, this is a misnomer because the RV is seldom infarcted. It's also known as reversible myocardial ischemia, right? Yeah, although we call it an infarction, it is seldom infarcted. If you look at autopsy studies of patients with inferior wall plus RVMI, you seldom find that the RV is infarcted and necrosed. And in comparison to an anterior wall MI, you can see that the anterior wall is entirely infarcted and necrosed. Also, if you follow up patients who have had an inferior wall with RVMI, you see that the 3 months down the line or even 2 months down the line, you see the RV appears to be normal. It has completely regained its normal function and characteristics. The right ventricle appears to be relatively resistant to infarction and recovers even after prolonged occlusion. In most patients, acute RV dysfunction represents ischemic but predominantly viable myocardium. Even in the absence of reperfusion, RV performance improves spontaneously. So even if you don't do a lysis or you don't do a primary PCI, over a period of time, the RV performance increases and comes back to normal. So you do an echo after 2 or 3 months after the MI, you find that the RV appears to be normal. However, this recovery may be slow, and during the course of the slow recovery, you may have high in-hospital mortality. So the RV recovers in most of the cases, but this recovery may be slow, and during that period of time, you may develop adverse events. Why does the RV seldom infarct? One is the RV is thin-walled, it's around 4 millimeter, and can get nourishment by diffusion from blood within the RV cavity. So direct diffusion can give it nourishment. Two is the RCA, the right coronary artery is filled both in systole and diastole. I shall come back to that in the next slide. Three is RV ejects against a lower afterload. So because the pulmonary artery pressure is around 25/10, the RV has to eject against a lower resistance compared to the LV, which ejects against the aortic pressure of 120/80. Hence, you have a lower workload, thereby a lower myocardial oxygen demand. Last is the RV may have dual blood supply. It can be supplied by the RCA. It can be supplied by the circumflex in a codominant system. It can also be supplied by septal branches arising from the LAD. So you have multiple sources. So the RV seldom infarcts. This is a pressure tracing in the arteries. This is the aortic pressure. You can see the aortic aorta filling during systole. This is the aortic pressure increasing during systole. Look at the coronary arteries. Now, the normal traditional teaching is that the coronary arteries fill in diastole because the myocardium contracts and compresses the coronary artery during systole. Now, this is true only for the left coronary artery because the LV is very thick-walled. You can see that the blood flow in the left coronary artery falls markedly in systole and then increases during diastole. In comparison, the blood flow in the right coronary artery is present both in systole as well as in diastole. So the right coronary artery fills both in systole and diastole in comparison to the left coronary artery, which fills mainly in diastole. Now this has therapeutic importance also. Suppose you thrombolize this patient. The success of thrombolysis, apart from the time window, is directly correlated with pressure head and the duration of contact of thrombolytic agent and thrombus. So you have a higher pressures, that is, suppose the patient is hypertension, he will have a better thrombolytic result. But we generally don't thrombolyze blood pressures of more than 180, 110 without reducing the BP. This is because a high blood pressure increases the risk of stroke. So you might get a better myocardial perfusion in case of hypertension, but at the risk of hemorrhagic stroke. So, and the duration of contact between thrombolytic agent and thrombus. So, lysing a patient with right coronary artery occlusion where blood flow is present both in systole and diastole means a longer period of contact between lytic agent and thrombus in comparison to the left coronary artery. So this is why you have a consistent observation that failed thrombolysis is more common in the anterior territories or LAD territories. The reason is the LAD fills only during systole. So next question is, how is BP maintained by IV fluids in RVMI? Now the usual answer we get is that the increased venous return stretches the RV and the RV contracts because of the Frank-Starling mechanism and fills the pulmonary circulation. However, this concept is wrong because the RV is already ischemic, and ischemic RV is where it is very difficult to increase its contraction. So you give IV fluids increase venous return. This increased venous return stretches the right atrium. Now, by Frank-Starling mechanism, there is increased right atrial contraction. Now, remember, it's the right atrium which plays the important role, not the right ventricle. And the increased right atrial contraction drives blood through the low pressure pulmonary circulation. So the pulmonary circulation is in extremely low pressure circulation. It's around 25/10 millimeters. So an increased right atrial contraction is the one which is responsible for driving the blood through the low pressure pulmonary circulation. In an RVMI, the right ventricle acts merely as a conduit. So it is the right atrium which contracts and drives blood flow through into the pulmonary circulation. So any problem of right atrial contraction can cause precipitous decrease in BP because now the right atrium will not contract as well as the right ventricle. Suppose the patient goes in for atrial fibrillation, there is no effective contraction of the right atrium. Or suppose there's an atrial infarction where the atrium is infarcted also. So there's no effective contraction of the right atrium. Or you have conditions like complete heart block or junctional rhythm, where the atrial contraction is not effectively transmitted to the ventricle. In those cases, you can have a fall of blood pressure. So what are the subgroups of RVMI which are more vulnerable for hypotension? These are the patients which don't respond to fluids. So because the right atrium is rendered ineffective, like atrial fibrillation, atrial infarction as said before, complete heart block and junctional rhythm. In these cases, the atrium will contract against a closed tricuspid valve. So the blood is not transmitted to the right ventricle. The last is heart failure with preserved ejection fraction. I shall do a video on this a bit later. When you have a very thick ventricle, as in this case, you have a very thick left ventricle, maybe due to hypertension or let's say aortic stenosis or hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, the LV end, the cavity size decreases. So this means that a small decrease in blood volume can significantly decrease forward flow, whereas a small increase in blood volume can significantly increase atrial pressures and cause pulmonary edema. This is called a narrow preload reserve. So in a significantly hypertrophied left ventricle, the LV has a narrow preload reserve. That means small increases in blood volume can have dramatic effects. So small increase in blood volume can cause pulmonary edema. A small decrease in blood volume can cause profound hypotension. Now just imagine the RV is non-functional. The blood flow to the left heart decreases. Thereby, it can cause tremendous hypotension. So we shall release a video on the effects of heart failure, preserved ejection fraction, and the narrow preload reserve a bit later. So you need not worry about that. So this is what will be the BP of this patient. Again, you have an inferior wall MI with appears to be predominantly junctional rhythm. So you have an RVMI also. So inferior RVMI with junctional rhythm. You expect this patient's BP to be low because the RA cannot effectively pump blood into the pulmonary circulation. Again, atrial fibrillation with an inferior and RVMI, you can see the discordance between V1 and V2. This patient again will be in hypotension because the RA cannot effectively contract. Again, inferior wall with an RVMI, patient is in complete heart block. Again, this patient is expected to be in hypotension. So keep in mind the various presentations of RVMI, the many phases and the many misconceptions. So please like, share and subscribe and press the bell icon to get notified when a new video releases. Thank you.